bears a silence to some places that's heavier than others. It's not an absence of sound, but a presence of something else. Something that listens. I learned that the hard way, the week I agreed to house-sit for my friend Eli at his ranch. It wasn't a farm, not in the idyllic sense. It was a ranch, a stubborn, weather-beaten patch of land that clung to the edge of the state line like a limpet on a rusted ship hull. The kind of place where the map bleeds, and you get the feeling that more than just geography gets lost in the blur. Eli had inherited it from his father, and his father before him, a legacy of dust, cattle, and quiet desperation. He needed to get away for a week to handle some family business back east, and I, between jobs and leases, was the only one he trusted who was both available and, I suppose, foolhardy enough to say yes. He described it as quiet, peaceful, a chance to get my head straight. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. The peace out there wasn't a comfort. It was a held breath. I pulled up to the main house in my beat-up sedan, a city car profoundly out of place in this landscape of grit and granite. The house was a low-slung, single-story structure of faded white clapboard, its porch sagging like a tired smile. Surrounding it was a graveyard of old ambitions, a skeletal tractor that hadn't seen paint in 50 years, a corral with fences patched more with wire and hope than new wood, and beyond that, the vast rolling expanse of scrubland and jagged hills that marched all the way to the horizon. The sky was a huge, empty bowl of pale blue, and the sun felt thin, like it was struggling to reach this far. The first to greet me weren't Eli, but his two blue heelers, Duke and Duchess. They came trotting around the side of the house, not barking, but with a quiet, assessing intensity that was more disconcerting than a frenzy. They were medium-sized dogs, all muscle and sinew, with coats of mottled blue-gray and intelligent, watchful eyes. They stopped a few feet from me, tails still, noses working the air, deciphering my scent, my intent. "Hey there," I said, my voice sounding small and foreign in the immense quiet. "You must be Duke and Duchess. Eli's told me all about you." At the sound of their master's name, Duke's tail gave a single tentative wag. Duchess just stared, her gaze unblinking. I'd never been judged so thoroughly by an animal. The front door creaked open and Eli stepped out, a grin splitting his weathered face. He was a man carved from the same wood as his ranch, lean, strong, and etched with the lines of a hard life willingly lived. "You made it," he said, his voice a familiar, gravelly comfort. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Was starting to think you'd got lost. Your directions were turn off the paved road and keep going until you feel like you've gone too far," I reminded him. It was unnervingly accurate. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that was swallowed by the landscape. "Come on in. I'll show you the ropes. It's not complicated. The cattle are out on the north pasture. They've got water and grass. Just need a visual check every couple of days to make sure none are stuck or sick. The real job?" He gestured to the dogs, who had now positioned themselves on either side of me, a silent, furry honor guard. "They're the real guardians of this place. You feed them, water them, and they'll do the rest. They know this land better than I do." The inside of the house was exactly what you'd expect. Worn leather couches, a stone fireplace that smelled of old ash, bookshelves filled with Louis L'Amour novels, and veterinary manuals. It was a comfortable, masculine space, but it felt temporary, like Eli himself was just a caretaker for a history that was slowly being reclaimed by the dust. He gave me the tour, the quirks of the plumbing, which demanded a specific, ritualistic sequence of knob turning to avoid a geyser. The generator out back, just in case. The radio in the kitchen, the only reliable link to the outside world, though its range was pitiful. He showed me the guest room, a Spartan cell with a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the front gate, about 100 yards away. "It's peaceful," I said, and this time I meant it. The sheer, unadulterated silence was starting to feel like a balm after the constant noise of my life. "It is," Eli agreed, but his eyes drifted to the window, to the vast emptiness beyond. "Mostly. Sometimes, forget it. You'll be fine. The dogs will let you know if anything's off." "Off how?" I asked, a thread of curiosity pulling tight in my gut. He shrugged, a little too casually. "Coyotes. The occasional mountain lion looking for an easy meal. The dogs'll raise hell. They've got a hell of a bark when they need it." He looked at them, lying now by the door, their ears twitching at every faint sound from Duke and Duchess patrolled the perimeter with a quiet professionalism. They'd circle the house, stop, sniff the air, and move on. They were a well-oiled machine of instinct and duty. As dusk deepened into night, the sounds of the desert came alive. Crickets sawed their legs together, a distant owl hooted, the wind whispered through the mesquite. It was a symphony I hadn't heard in years, a soundtrack of solitude. I made dinner, the simple act of cooking for myself, feeling novel and satisfying. The dogs came in and settled at my feet, finally accepting my presence. I gave them their kibble, which they ate with a quiet efficiency. We were a team now, the three of us against the void. It was after nightfall, sitting in the living room with only a single lamp on, that I felt the first prickle of something. Not fear, not yet. It was a feeling of exposure. The windows were black squares, and I had the distinct, unsettling sensation that the darkness outside was no longer empty, that it was now a solid thing, a wall of obsidian that was pressing in, watching the little island of light I'd created inside. I shook it off. City nerves. This is what I wanted, right? To get away from it all. I decided to turn in early. The bed in the guest room was firm. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent and dust. I lay there, listening to the house settle. It creaked and popped, old bones complaining about the cooling air. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling softly under the eaves. And then, another sound, faint. I held my breath, listening. It was the dogs. They were on the porch, just outside my window. They weren't barking, they weren't growling, but I could hear the soft shuff-shuff of their paws as they paced. Back and forth, a restless, anxious patrol. I closed my eyes, telling myself it was just a coyote passing by. They were doing their job. This was what Eli meant. Everything was fine. And then I heard it. It came from the direction of the front gate, 100 yards down the dirt drive. A voice. Hey! It was Eli's voice, or a perfect copy of it. The same gravelly timbre, the same inflection. My eyes snapped open. I lay perfectly still, my heart suddenly a hammer in my chest. That was impossible. He'd been gone for hours. He was halfway to the city by now. The voice came again, clearer this time, cutting through the still night air. Hey, you in there? It was him. It had to be. Maybe his truck broke down. Maybe he forgot something. The rational part of my brain, the part that still lived in a world of logic and paved roads, seized on these explanations. But something deeper, something primal and cold, was coiling in my stomach. I swung my legs out of bed and crept to the window. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. I could just make out the shape of the front gate, a darker silhouette against the dark landscape. I couldn't see anyone. Then the voice a third time. Come on out here a second. This time I heard it. The offness. It was Eli's voice, but it was flat. like a recording played back on a cheap device. There was no breath behind it, no life. It was just sound, projected into the night. And the dogs? The dogs were the worst part. They had stopped pacing. They were standing rigid, side by side, facing the gate. Their bodies were tense, ears pitched forward, tails stiff. But they were utterly, profoundly silent. Not a whine, not a growl, not a single click of a claw on the porch wood. It was the silence Eli had warned me about. The kind of silence that meant something was terribly, terribly wrong. My hand went to the window latch to open it and call back, but my fingers froze an inch from the cold metal. Every instinct I didn't even know I possessed was screaming at me. Don't answer. Don't acknowledge it. The voice didn't call again. For a long minute there was only that heavy, listening silence. I stood at the window, my breath fogging the glass, my body trembling with a cocktail of fear and confusion. Who was that? A neighbor? A prank? But there were no neighbors for miles. And that voice, it was too perfect, and yet so utterly wrong. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the dogs relax. Duke let out a low huff, shaking his head as if to clear it. Duchess turned and looked directly at my window, her eyes catching a sliver of moonlight, gleaming for a moment before she turned and resumed her pacing, this time with less urgency. I backed away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. I tried to logic it away, a trick of the wind, an echo from some far-off highway, my own tired brain playing tricks on me. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that it was none of those things. Something had been out there, something that knew Eli's voice, and it had called for me. Sleep was impossible. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room armchair, a kitchen knife on the table beside me, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. The dogs came in and lay at my feet, their presence a small, warm comfort. They'd known. They'd known it wasn't Eli. They'd known it was something to be silent for. The next morning, the world was restored to normalcy. The sun was bright and hot, burning away the shadows and the night's terrors. The events of a few hours ago felt like a bad dream, fading in the harsh light of day. I went about my chores with a forced cheerfulness, checking the water troughs from a distance, the dogs trotting alongside me. Everything was fine. It had to be. But the seed of dread had been planted. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was anticipatory. It was on the second night that the breathing started. I'd gone to bed, more out of habit than any expectation of rest. The house was locked up tight. I'd even dragged a chair in front of the front door. A pathetic barricade, but it made me feel better. The dogs were inside, sleeping in the hallway. I must have drifted off because the sound woke me with a jolt. It was right outside my bedroom window, the sound of someone breathing. Not the normal, gentle sound of an animal. This was slow, deliberate, and wet. A deep, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation, like someone with a respiratory issue, or something that was savoring the scent of me on the other side of the thin pane of glass. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the curtain, listening to that horrible, intimate sound. It was so close. The window was cracked open about 2 inches at the top for air. Whatever was out there was pressed against the screen. Then it spoke, but not in Eli's voice this time. This voice was older, raspier, a voice I'd only heard a handful of times on brief visits. "Son," it said. It was Eli's father, a man who had passed away 3 years ago. "Son, you need to let me in. It's cold out here." The cadence was all wrong. It was like someone had recorded the old man's words and was stitching them together, out of order. The pauses were in the wrong places. The emotion was a cheap imitation. "My boy, is he here? Eli? Let me see my boy." The breathing continued, a foul counterpoint to the words. I could hear a faint, sticky sound, like a tongue too large for a mouth, moving over lips. The dogs were in the room now. I hadn't even heard them come in. They were standing by my bed, not looking at the window, but looking at me. Duchess gave a low, almost inaudible whine. It wasn't a sound of fear, but of urgency, a warning. Don't move. Don't speak. I clenched my jaw shut, my hands fisting in the sheets. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell at it to go away. But the memory of the night before, the dog's silence, held me in check. "I know you're in there." The voice wheezed. There was a scratching sound then, a single long drag of something against the clapboard wall, just below the windowsill. It didn't sound like a branch. It sounded like a nail, a long, hard nail. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The breathing ceased. The presence was gone. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the wind, rushed back in to fill the void, as if they too had been holding their breath. I spent the rest of the night with the dogs on the bed with me, their solid, warm bodies pressed against mine, a barrier of loyalty and instinct against the unknown. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I was emerging from a fever dream. I had to see. I had to know. With the dogs flanking me, I went outside and around to the side of the house, beneath my bedroom window. The ground was soft there, kept damp by the drip line from the roof, and there, in the dirt, were tracks. But they weren't animal tracks. They were the vague, blurred impressions of bare human feet. But the toes were too long, splayed out like fingers. And in the center of each footprint, where the arch should be, was a deep, punctured hole, as if whatever made them had a single sharp spur in the middle of its foot. I stared at those tracks, my skin crawling. This was no dream. This was no prank. Something had been standing outside my window. Something that wore the voices of the dead like a skin. The piece of the ranch was a lie. I wasn't a house sitter. I was a lamb in a pen, and something was circling the fence. The days took on a new, grim rhythm. I'd sleep fitfully during the day, the bright sun my only solace, and then stand watch through the night, a sentry in a silent war. I checked the cattle from a distance with binoculars. They seemed fine, oblivious. The dogs were my constant companions, my canaries in the coal mine. Their mood dictated my own. If they were relaxed, I could breathe. If they went still and silent, my heart would plummet. I found myself talking to them. "You hear that, guys? Is that just the wind?" Duchess would often just look at me, her head tilted, as if to say, "You know it's not." I was fraying at the edges. The isolation was no longer a concept. It was a physical weight. The vast, empty landscape was no longer beautiful. It was a hiding place. Every shadow in the midday sun seemed to hold a hidden shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered word. It was on the fourth day that I remembered the trail cameras. Eli had mentioned them in his rushed tour. A few were set up around the property's perimeter to monitor wildlife, deer, javelina, the occasional predator. They were motion-activated, storing images on SD cards. A desperate, morbid curiosity seized me. If something was out there, maybe one of these cameras had seen it. Maybe I could get proof. Not to show anyone. Who would I show? But for my own sanity, to prove I wasn't going mad. I spent the afternoon locating them. One was on a fence post near the main gate. Another was pointed at a game trail that led down to a dry wash. I collected the SD cards, my hands shaking slightly. I felt like a grave robber, about to exhume something terrible. Back in the house, I slotted the first card into my laptop. The images loaded, mostly false triggers. Waving grass, a jackrabbit frozen mid-hop, the dogs patrolling during the day. Then, from the camera near the gate, a series of images from the first night. The timestamp was 11:34 p.m., right around the time I'd heard the voice. The first image was dark, mostly shadows. The second was the same. The third, there was a blur of motion near the gate. It was too fast, too indistinct, just a smear of darkness. My heart was pounding. I clicked to the next image. And there it was. It was a picture of me, or at least it was a man who looked exactly like me. He was standing just outside the gate, facing the camera. He was wearing my jacket, the same green canvas jacket I'd left hanging on a hook by the front door. But the proportions were all wrong. The sleeves were too long, the shoulders slumped and distorted, as if the body inside wasn't built to wear it properly. The stance was awkward, one leg bent at an angle that looked painful. But the face was mine. It was a perfect replica, except for the eyes. In the grainy infrared image, the eyes were just solid black pits. No light, no reflection, no soul. It was smiling. A small, knowing smile that I knew I never made. A smile that was a mockery of human expression. I recoiled from the laptop as if it had bitten me. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. This was worse than a monster I could fight. This was violation. It was wearing my face. It was learning me, studying me, trying me on for size. I scrambled to eject the SD card. I couldn't bear to look at it for another second. I hid it away, tucking it inside a book on the highest shelf. I didn't want it, but I couldn't destroy it. It was evidence. It was the only thing that proved I wasn't insane. The implications crashed over me like a wave. If it could look like me, what was stopping it from just walking up to the door and letting itself in? Did it need an invitation? The stories, the old folklore, whispered at the edges of my mind. Things that mimicked, things that stole skins. I'd always thought they were just stories. Now I knew they were warnings. The world outside the windows felt infinitely more threatening. It wasn't just that something was out there. It was that something was out there that could be me. How could I trust my own eyes, my own memories? If I saw myself walking toward the house, would I know which one was real? The paranoia was a poison, seeping into every thought. I started double-checking everything. I'd look at a reflection in a window and jump, thinking it was moving on its own. The line between what was real and what was imitation was blurring, and I was terrified of falling into the gap. It was the next afternoon, in the depths of this new fear, that I heard a car engine, a real one, grinding its way up the access road. The dogs perked up, but they didn't go into their alert stance. This was a familiar, non-threatening sound. I looked out the window to see a dusty old pickup truck pulling up next to my car. A woman got out, maybe in her late 60s, with a face like a weathered map and sharp, intelligent eyes. She was dressed in practical, worn clothing. This was someone who belonged to this land. The dogs trotted out to greet her, their tails wagging in a relaxed, friendly manner. That was the best reassurance I could have asked for. I opened the front door as she approached the porch. "You must be Eli's friend," she said, her voice as dry and raspy as the mesquite leaves. "I'm Allie, live a few miles over the ridge." She gestured vaguely to the east, saw Eli's truck was gone, wanted to make sure everything was square. "I'm house-sitting for the week," I said, feeling a surge of relief at the sight of another human being. "Everything's fine." She looked at me, her gaze lingering on my face, on the shadows I knew were under my eyes. She didn't look convinced. "Uh-huh," she said. "The dog's been quiet at night?" The question was so specific, so pointed, that it stole the breath from my lungs. I just stared at her. She gave a slow, grim nod. "Thought so. Can I come in?" "Won't take but a minute." I made her coffee, my hands still not quite steady. She sat at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the room, taking everything in. She had a quiet, grounded presence that felt ancient and unshakable. "Eli's a good boy," she said, sipping the black coffee. "His daddy was a good man, stubborn but good. This land, it's got a long memory, and it doesn't always like to be left alone." "What's out here, Allie?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She set her mug down and looked at me directly. "Different folks have different names for it. Skinwalker, ghoul, mimic, I just call it the other. It's old. Older than the fences. Older than the state line. It lives in the cracks of things. It's not a ghost. It's a predator. But it don't hunt for meat." "What does it hunt for?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. "It hunts for us," she said simply. "For our voices, our memories, our skin. It's lonely in its way. A terrible, empty loneliness. And it wants to be people. But it doesn't know how. It can only copy. It can only pretend." The trail camera image flashed in my mind. The thing wearing my face, my skin. "I've heard it," I confessed, the words tumbling out. "It used Eli's voice, then his father's. It was outside my window." Allie nodded, her expression grave but not surprised. "It's testing you, learning your sounds, seeing what works. It's clever, but it's not smart. It doesn't understand the things it copies. That's your only advantage." "What do I do?" The question was a plea. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small drawstring bag made of faded leather. She loosened the string and poured a small pile of fine gray powder onto the table. It looked like ash. I thought of that first night, my hand hovering over the window latch. I'd come so close. "Second," she said, holding up 2 fingers, "do not take anything it offers you. And do not, under any circumstances, give it anything. Not a word, not a drop of water, not a crumb of food. A gift is a contract. You do not want a contract with it." And third, she said, her voice dropping, "Trust the dogs. They see the truth in things. They see the emptiness behind the mask. You watch them. Their silence is a scream. Their growl is a prayer. You heed it." She handed me the little leather bag. It was still half full. "This should be enough. Reapply the lines if the wind blows them away. But it's usually calm when it's around. It stills the air." I took the bag. It was warm from her pocket. "Thank you, Allie." She gave me a sad smile. "It's a terrible thing to be chosen by it. But you seem like you've got a strong spirit. Just remember the rules. Don't answer. Don't give. Don't take. Trust the dogs." She finished her coffee and saw herself out. I stood at the window and watched her truck disappear back over the ridge. I felt armed, not with a weapon, but with knowledge. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was now joined by a grim resolve. I spent the remaining hours of daylight meticulously laying the ash lines. Across every windowsill, front and back. Along the threshold of the back door. Across the fireplace hearth. I even poured a fine line along the bottom of the cracked open bedroom window. The gray powder was a tangible declaration. You are not welcome here. As night fell, I prepared for a siege. I had food, water, a flashlight. The dogs were inside, their calm presence my anchor. I sat in the living room, in the dark, and I waited. The night was unnaturally still. No wind, no crickets. It was the quiet before the storm. It didn't wait long. It was around 10 o'clock when I heard the engine. The distinct diesel rumble of Eli's truck coming up the access road. My heart leaped, a frantic, hopeful beat. He was back early. The week was over. The terror was finished. I started to get up, a cry of relief on my lips, but the dogs stopped me. They were both on their feet, staring at the door. But they weren't wagging their tails. They weren't making a sound. They were rigid, their bodies low to the ground, a deep, subsonic growl vibrating from Duke's chest. It was a sound I hadn't heard from him before. It was pure, undiluted hatred. Trust the dogs. I froze, my hope curdling into a new, more sophisticated kind of fear. I crept to the window and peered out through a slit in the curtains. It was Eli's truck. Every detail was perfect. The dent in the left fender, the peeling "This truck paid for by country music" sticker on the bumper. The driver's side door opened and Eli got out. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. He stretched, yawned, and started walking toward the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel. It was him. Every movement, every mannerism. He even scratched the back of his head in that specific way he did when he was tired. "Hey," he called out, his voice perfectly normal, perfectly Eli. "You in there? Sorry I'm back early. The whole thing got canceled. What a waste of time, huh?" He walked right up to the front porch. He was just on the other side of the door. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass of the top panel. "You gonna let me in?" he said, a laugh in his voice. "I'm beat, and I smell like city. It's awful." My hand trembled, hovering over the deadbolt. It was him. It had to be him. Ali's words echoed in my head, but they were being shouted down by the overwhelming, visceral evidence of my own eyes and ears. This was no recording. This was no flat imitation. This was my friend. "Come on, man," he said, and now his voice took on a note of playful annoyance. "Did you lock me out of my own house? Very funny. Now open up." I looked down at the dogs. Their growls had intensified. Duchess was baring her teeth, her lips pulled back in a silent snarl. They were staring at the door as if it were the gateway to hell itself. "Trust the dogs." I can't," I managed to say, my voice cracking. There was a pause. I could almost feel the thing on the other side of the door recalibrating. "What do you mean you can't?" Eli's voice was still light, but there was a new edge to it. "It's my house. I have the key. You know, I just don't want to dig for it. My bags are in the truck." It was a perfect performance. It was using my own logic, my own social expectations, against me. I was being rude. I was being a bad guest. I was being paranoid. "It's just the dogs," I stammered, grasping for an excuse. They're acting strange." "They're always strange," the Eli thing said, laughing. "They're healers. It's their job. Now come on, this is ridiculous." My fingers were inches from the deadbolt. It would be so easy to end the fear, to have another human being here, to hand over this terrible responsibility. Every fiber of my being, every civilized instinct, was screaming at me to open the door. Ali's third rule was the only thing holding me back. Trust the dogs. And the dogs were telling me, in a language older than words, that the man on the other side of that door was not Eli. I took a step back. No, the silence from the other side was immediate and absolute. The friendly pretense evaporated. The air grew cold. "No," the voice said. It was still Eli's, but the warmth was gone. It was now flat, dead, and dangerously calm. "Let me in." "You're not Eli," I whispered, more to myself than to it. "Of course I am," it said. There was a subtle wrongness creeping back in now, the cadence starting to slip. "Who else would I be? Open the door!" "You left the rifle," I said suddenly, the memory surfacing like a lifeline. "The one your dad gave you, the 3006. You said you never ever go anywhere without it. It's in the hall closet. If you're really Eli, where is it?" There was a long, stretching silence. I could hear a faint, wet clicking sound, like a mouth trying to form words without the right anatomy. "I forgot it," the thing finally said, but the sentence was stilted, wrong. "You never forget it," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You told me it was the first thing you packed. You said it was like forgetting your pants." The facade was cracking. The thing on the porch was silent for a full minute. Then it spoke again, and the voice was a distorted hybrid now. Bits of Eli, bits of his father, and something else entirely. Something ancient and dry. "Let me in." It wasn't asking anymore. It was demanding. Then it knocked on the door. Not with a fist. It was a single, hard tap, like a branch hitting the wood. Then another, and another. A slow, relentless rhythm that began to shake the door in its frame. Tap, tap. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dogs were barking now, a furious, frantic sound, hurling themselves at the door, their teeth bared. Tap, tap, tap. The blows were getting harder. The frosted glass in the top of the door vibrated with each impact. I saw a hairline crack appear. It was trying to break in. I looked around, desperate. The ash line was still there, a thin, gray barrier. The thing hadn't crossed it. It was trying to break down the door instead. The knocking became a pounding, a terrible, brute force assault that filled the whole house with noise. The door jamb splintered. The deadbolt groaned. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was ringing, absolute. The dogs stopped barking, their chests heaving, their barks dissolving into confused whines. They sniffed at the bottom of the door, their tails giving a few tentative wags, then drooping. It was gone. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the door, the chair shoved firmly under the knob. The dogs pressed against me, and I waited for the sun. The ash line remained undisturbed. When the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I felt a relief so profound it was almost painful. I had survived the night. I had passed the test. A few hours later, another vehicle came up the road. This time, the dogs went wild, barking and scratching at the door, their tails whipping back and forth in a frenzy of joy. I looked out the window, my nerves shot, half expecting another trick. But it was Eli, the real Eli. I could see it in the way he moved, in the way the dogs reacted. He looked tired, but normal. He saw the chair against the door from the window, and his face filled with concern. I opened the door, and the dogs exploded out, covering him in happy licks. "Whoa, guys, hey," he laughed, then looked at me. His smile faded. "Jesus, you look like hell. What happened?" I just looked at him, at the genuine confusion and worry in his eyes. I looked at the rifle case in the back seat of his truck. "You were right," I said, my voice hoarse from the night's terror. It was a quiet week. I didn't tell him everything. Not then. I just packed my bags, got in my car, and followed his truck off the ranch, away from the state line, away from the heavy silence. I didn't look back. I never told him the whole story. Some things are too dark to share. but I kept the little leather bag of ash, and I still have it. You never know when you might need to draw a line. There's a silence to some places that's heavier than others. It's not an absence of sound, but a presence of something else, something that listens, and sometimes something that answers. I got a postcard from Eli a few months later. He'd sold the ranch, moved to town. He said he just got tired of the quiet. I think he knew, maybe not the details, but he knew. Some places, the ground has a memory, and some things that live in that memory learn to wear the faces of those you love, waiting for an invitation to come inside. All you can do is learn the rules. Don't answer, don't give, don't take, and trust the dogs, because the thing that mimics, it's always out there, in the quiet places, learning, waiting, and it knows your name. The city welcomed me back with its constant, reassuring noise, the sirens, the distant thrum of the freeway, the muffled conversations from the apartment next door. It was a symphony of human life, a blanket of sound I wrapped around myself, trying to smother the memory of that profound, listening silence. For the first few weeks, I jumped at every sound. A creak in the floorboards was no longer just the building settling. It was a footstep. A distant shout from the street wasn't just a drunk. It was a voice calling my name. I'd find myself staring at my own reflection in the dark glass of my window at night, half expecting the face staring back to smile with a knowledge I didn't possess. I kept the little leather bag of ash in my bedside drawer. It was my talisman, my reminder that the line had held. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'd open the drawer just to make sure it was still there. The faint, smoky scent of juniper, a strange comfort in my sterile apartment. I saw Eli a week after we returned. We met at a loud, brightly lit sports bar, a place so aggressively normal, it felt like another planet. The clatter of plates, the roar of a crowd watching a game on a dozen screens, the smell of fried food and beer. It was a sensory overload, and I clung to it. He looked better. The deep-seated weariness that seemed etched into his bones out at the ranch had softened. He'd had a haircut. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt, not the oil-stained work clothes I was used to. So, he said, after we'd ordered beers and made awkward small talk about the weather, the traffic, anything but the one thing that hung between us. You never really told me. What happened out there? I took a long pull from my bottle. The condensation felt cold and real in my hand. What do you think happened, Eli? He looked down, tracing a pattern in the water rings on the table. The place. It has a way of getting to people. Always has. My dad, he used to talk to himself, long conversations out on the porch at night. When I was a kid, I thought he was just lonely. Now, I'm not so sure. He ever say anything about voices? Things that sounded like people? Eli's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a confirmation of everything I'd feared. He told me stories when I was too young to understand. Said his own father warned him, told him about the Echo Man, something that lived in the draws and canyons, that learned your shape so he could wear it. He shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. I thought it was just a story to keep me from wandering off, like a boogeyman. It's not a story, I said, my voice low. I know. He took a deep breath. After my mom died, it got worse for him. The thing, it used her voice. One night, I found him standing at the back door, his hand on the knob, sobbing. He said he could hear her singing his favorite song out in the dark, the song she sang to him when we were kids. He said it was perfect. But the dogs, they were going insane, trying to drag him away from the door. He never opened it. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning crawled down my spine. Why didn't you ever tell me? And say what? He asked, his voice thick with a guilt I'd never seen in him before. "Hey, wanna watch my place for a week? Oh, by the way, there's a shape-shifting entity that'll try to psychologically dismantle you. Hope that's cool?" You'd have thought I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. Maybe we both have. We sat in silence for a moment, the raucous cheer of the bar feeling a million miles away. "I sold the place to a corporate ag group," he said finally. "They're gonna use it for grazing, I think. Send hired hands out in shifts. No one stays there alone for long." "That's probably for the best," I said, and I meant it. But a part of me wondered if sending a rotation of unsuspecting men into that territory was like offering it a tasting menu. "What did it do to you?" Eli asked, his gaze intense. "What was its trick with you?" I told him. Not everything, but the highlights. The voice at the gate, the breathing at the window, the trail camera photo. His face grew paler with each detail. When I got to the part about it mimicking him, perfectly, down to the dent in his truck, he pushed his beer away, his appetite gone. "Jesus," he whispered. "It's never been that detailed before. With my dad, it was always just voices, impressions. It never built a whole scene." "It's learning," I said, repeating Allie's words. "It's getting better." The thought hung in the air between us, a dark and terrible evolution. Life, as it does, moved on. I got a job, a soulless but comfortable gig in a cubicle farm, processing data that meant nothing to me. The mind-numbing routine was a kind of therapy. There was no room for existential dread between spreadsheets and weekly status reports. I tried to date a nice woman named Sarah from the accounting department. We went for coffee, then dinner. She was funny, smart, grounded. Everything I should have wanted. But during a lull in the conversation at a nice Italian restaurant, I found myself staring past her, out the window, into the dark street. A man was standing under a street lamp, his posture familiar, his coat the same shade of green as my old ranch jacket. My heart stopped. I squinted, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her smile faltering. The man under the street lamp turned. It wasn't me, it was just a man, with a different face, a different life. He lit a cigarette and walked away. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile back onto my face. "Sorry, just thought I saw someone I knew." The incident shook me. It wasn't the thing itself, it was the reflex. The immediate, gut-level assumption that it was the other. The fear had burrowed deep, a parasite wrapped around my brainstem. I started having dreams, not nightmares of being chased, but more subtle, more insidious ones. I'd dream I was back at the ranch, but everything was normal. Eli was there. We were barbecuing. The dogs were playing fetch. It was peaceful. And then I'd notice a small detail. Eli would have 6 fingers on his left hand. The dogs would have no eyes. The sun would be a black disk in a green sky. And in the dream, I wouldn't be afraid. I'd just accept it. That was the most terrifying part. The dream me's complacency. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the line between the dream and the memory blurred. Was the peaceful part the dream, or was the terror the dream? For a few disorienting seconds each morning, I wasn't sure. I became obsessed with folklore. In the safety of my well-lit apartment, surrounded by the city's glow, I devoured books and online forums about mimics and skinwalkers, about the Fata Morgana and the doppelganger. I was trying to codify it, to put it in a box labeled mythology. But the stories from other people, they were too familiar. The feeling of being watched by something wearing a loved one's face, the voices from the woods, the overwhelming sense of wrongness. They were all singing the same terrible song, just in different keys. I found myself on a niche subreddit, one dedicated to high strangeness in rural areas. I'd never posted, just lurked. One night, a new thread caught my eye. The title was, "The Man at the State Line." My blood ran cold. I clicked on it. The post was from a user named Desert Witness. It was a short, frantic account. My family has ranched near the redacted state line for generations. There's a story about a patch of land that's bad. My great-grandfather called it the copying place. He said something lived there that mirrored people. It got my uncle in '78. He went out to check a fence line and came back different. Quiet. Knew things he shouldn't. He lasted 3 days before he walked back out into the desert and never returned. The old-timers used to leave offerings of ash and salt at the property lines. They said it confused its senses. Anyone else heard of this? Or am I just going crazy out here? The comments were a mix of skepticism and chilling corroboration. "You're not crazy." Heard similar stories from my Navajo friends. They call it a Yi-nal-blushi. Doesn't like ash. I was a trucker. Picked up a hitchhiker near there once. Looked normal. Talked normal. But he kept asking me personal questions, mimicking my speech patterns. When I looked in the rear view, his face was blank, like clay. I kicked him out at the next gas station. Worst night of my life. Ash and iron. That's the old way. It hates iron. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. It was real. It had a history, a geography. I wasn't an isolated case. I was just another entry in a long, grim ledger. There was a strange, hollow comfort in that. I wasn't alone in my terror, but the terror itself was multiplied, knowing it was older, more widespread than I had ever imagined. The world felt thinner, like a fragile skin stretched over something ancient and hungry. The city lights outside my window no longer felt like a barrier. They felt like a lie. The call came on a Tuesday, about 6 months after I'd left the ranch. The number was unfamiliar, with an area code I didn't recognize, but it had the distinct echo of a satellite phone. I almost didn't answer, but some nagging instinct made me pick up. "Hello?" There was a burst of static, then a voice, faint and strained. "You there? It's Allie." My grip on the phone tightened. "Allie, how did you get this number?" "Eli," she said, the word crackling. "Listen, I don't have long. The signal's shit out here." "Out where? Are you okay?" "I'm at the ranch," she said, and my blood went cold. "What? Why?" "Eli sold it." "I know. The new owners, corporate boys. They don't listen, don't care." She took a shaky breath. "They sent a couple of hands out, young kids. One of them went missing 2 nights ago. They're searching with trucks and drones. They think he got lost, fell in a ravine." I knew, with a sickening certainty, that wasn't it. "The other one," Allie continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's still at the main house. He won't come out. He's barricaded himself in. He's babbling. Says his friend came back last night, but he was all wrong. Says he was smiling too much." The image from the trail camera flashed in my mind. The thing wearing my face, with that terrible, knowing smile. "Allie, you need to get out of there, now. It's not your fight. It's everyone's fight who sets foot on this land," she said, her voice grim. "I tried to talk to the boss man on the radio. He told me to stop spreading superstitious nonsense. They're not prepared. They're gonna get those boys killed, or worse." The line crackled, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost her. "Thing is," her voice came back, weaker now, "it's different, stronger, bolder. It's not just hiding in the dark anymore. Yesterday, in broad daylight, I saw it." "What did you see?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "I was driving the perimeter fence, looking for any sign of the missing boy. I saw him, the boy. He was standing by the dry wash, waving at me. He looked scared, relieved. I almost stopped, but my truck, the engine sputtered. Just for a second, and in that second, I saw his face shift. It was like a TV losing signal, a flicker of something underneath, something old and dry, and it was still waving, but the smile wasn't right. It was too wide. I could hear the raw fear in her voice, a woman who I thought was unshakable. I got out of there, but it's learning. It's using more sophisticated lures. It's playing on compassion now, not just confusion. She paused. I'm going back to the house tonight, to check on the other one, to make sure his lines are holding. Don't, I pleaded. It's a trap. It wants you all together. It's hurting you. Maybe, she said. There was a long silence, filled only by the hiss of static. It was the sound of emptiness, the sound of the desert. I had a feeling I should call you. You've looked it in the eye. You know its tricks. If something happens, someone else should know. It's getting stronger. The call dropped. The line went dead. I sat there in my quiet apartment, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounding like a distant, mocking imitation of the wind at the ranch. I looked out my window at the neat, orderly rows of streetlights, at the safe, predictable world I had built for myself. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like a sentence, that I wasn't done with the ranch at the state line. It wasn't done with me. The thing that mimics had my scent. It had my face stored in its library of skins. And now it was evolving. It was no longer just a predator of individuals in the dark. It was learning to hunt in the daylight, to prey on groups, to use our own humanity against us. The line I had drawn with Allie's ash had protected me, but it hadn't defeated the thing on the other side. It had just made it hungrier. It had just made it smarter. The silence in my apartment was no longer reassuring. It was the same silence from the ranch, the heavy, listening kind. And I knew, sooner or later, I was going to have to answer. They found the missing ranch hand 3 days later. He was wandering along the access road, dehydrated and sunburned, but physically unharmed. According to the official report, he had no memory of what happened. He just said he got lost. The other hand, the one who barricaded himself in the house, quit on the spot and left the state. He told his foreman he was never going back to that cursed ground. Allie stopped answering her phone. Eli drove out to her place a week after our call. He found her truck, but not her. Her house was empty. There was a line of ash, undisturbed, across her front doorstep. But the back door was wide open. There were no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had just stepped out. The corporate ag group wrote it off. A missing old woman, a spooked employee, just the cost of doing business in a remote area. They sent a new crew with strict buddy system rules and satellite beacons. As far as I know, they've had no further incidents. But I don't believe that. I think the other is just being patient. I think it's studying its new, more plentiful food source, learning their routines, their voices, their relationships. I still have the bag of ash. I keep it with me now, not in a drawer. I look at people on the street a little more closely these days. I watch for the subtle tells, the smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the pause in conversation that's a fraction too long, the familiar gesture that feels just a little bit stolen. Because the horrible truth I learned out there on the edge of the world is that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that want to destroy you. They're the ones that want to be you. They hollow you out from the inside, wearing your life like a suit, and the world never even knows you're gone. The ranch at the state line is just a place. The thing that lives there, that's the real problem. And places can be left behind. But the ideas they foster, the fears they birth, those are portable. So I stay in the city. I keep the lights on. I listen to the noise, and I wait. Because I know that mimicry isn't just a trick of the desert. It's a fundamental law of a much darker, much emptier universe. And once you've heard the void call your name in a voice you love, you never truly stop listening for it again. It's out there, learning, waiting, and its voice is getting better. Ali's visit had armed me. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut. But now I had a plan, a ritual, a line in the sand, or in this case, in the dust and on the windowsills. I spent the remaining hours of daylight like a priest preparing for an exorcism. The little leather bag of juniper ash became my holy instrument. I poured a fine, unbroken line across every possible threshold. The front door, the back door, every windowsill, even the small, high bathroom window, and the fireplace hearth. The gray powder was a tangible declaration, a silent mantra. You are not welcome here. This space is claimed. As I worked, Duke and Duchess followed me, their noses twitching at the scent of the ash. They didn't seem alarmed by it. If anything, they seemed approving. When I finished the final line at the back door, Duchess lay down directly in front of it, her head on her paws, a living, breathing addition to the barrier. That night, the siege began in earnest. It started with the motion-activated floodlight I'd rigged up on the porch. It blazed to life, bleaching the front yard in a harsh white light. Nothing was there. It clicked off. 10 seconds later, it flashed on again. Off, on, off, on. A frantic, strobing signal of an unseen presence tripping the sensor. It was playing with the lights, and by extension, with my nerves. Then the voices started. Not shouts, but conversations. It was testing its repertoire. First, it was Eli's father again, but this time he wasn't pleading. He was angry. Boy, you open this door right now. This is my house. You have no right to lock me out. The rage was a good imitation, but it was too one-note, a caricature of anger without the human complexity beneath. When that failed, it tried kindness. A woman's voice, soft and maternal, one I hadn't heard in years, my own mother's. Honey, it's so dark out here. I'm scared. Can I please come in? Just for a minute. The sound tore at a part of me I buried deep. It took everything I had to clamp my jaw shut, to feel the dogs pressing their warm bodies against my legs. A reminder of what was real. Its most disorienting trick was when it used my own voice. It started as a murmur, just audible over the wind. I thought I was hearing things, until I realized the words were being formed outside. I can't do this, my own voice said, laced with a despair I felt but had never voiced. I'm so tired. I should just open the door, get it over with. It was like listening to my own darkest thoughts given sound. A terrifying empathy washed over me. It understood my exhaustion, my isolation. It was weaponizing my own psyche. They'll never believe you, my voice continued, now with a cynical edge. You're going to leave here and everyone will think you're insane. Is that what you want? Maybe it's better to just let it in. See what happens. Maybe it's not so bad. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voice wasn't just in the air. It was in my head. I started whispering to myself, a counter mantra. It's not me. It's not me. It's not me. The entity cycled through its arsenal all night. Anger, pity, despair, reason. It was a master manipulator, finding every crack in my resolve and trying to pry it open. But Ali's rules were my shield. Don't answer. Don't give. Don't take. I gave it nothing. Not a word, not a sound. I just sat in the dark with the dogs and endured. As the first hint of dawn tinged the sky, the voices ceased. The motion light stayed dark. The silence felt earned. I had survived another night, but I knew it was learning. My resistance was just another data point for it to analyze. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that its most convincing performance was yet to come. It was on the sixth night that it deployed its ultimate weapon. I was dozing fitfully in the armchair when the sound of an engine yanked me awake. Not a phantom sound, but the distinct diesel rumble of Eli's truck coming up the access road. My heart leaped into my throat. Hope, desperate and irrational, flooded my system. He was back. It was over. I rushed to the window. There it was, Eli's truck, every dent and scratch, perfect. The driver's door opened, and Eli got out. He stretched, yawned, and slammed the door shut. He looked exhausted, but real, so utterly real. "Hey," he called out, his voice perfectly normal, laced with familiar annoyance. "You in there? Sorry I'm back early. The whole thing was a bust. What a waste of time." He walked up to the porch. I could see the stubble on his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes. It was him, the dogs. They didn't explode into joyful barks. They stood up, tense and silent. A low, continuous growl rumbled in Duke's chest. It was a sound of pure, undiluted warning. Trust the dogs. Allie's voice was a whisper in the storm of my hope, but it was so hard. This was Eli, my friend. "Come on, man," he said, leaning against the doorframe, his silhouette familiar through the frosted glass. "You gonna let me in? I've been driving for 10 hours. I stink. I'm starving." My hand trembled, hovering over the deadbolt. Every civilized instinct screamed at me to open the door. This was his house. I was being rude, paranoid, insane. I can't," I managed to choke out. "What do you mean, you can't?" he laughed. But there was an edge now. "It's my house. Did you break something? It's fine. Just open up." He was using logic, social pressure. It was so convincing. "It's just the rules," I stammered, clinging to the phrase like a lifeline. "Rules? What rules?" He sounded genuinely confused, then playfully exasperated. "Did Allie get to you? Listen to her old wives' tales? Come on, I'm too tired for this." He was dismantling my defenses one by one. He knew about Allie. Of course he did. It made perfect sense. My fingers touched the cold metal of the deadbolt. It would be so easy to end the fear, to have someone else share this burden. "All right, fine," he sighed, a sound of utter resignation. "I'll just get my bag. But you're explaining this to me inside, and you're making coffee. Unlock the door, would you? I forgot my key. And for God's sake, click off the safety on that deadbolt. It always sticks." I started to turn the bolt. It resisted, then gave with a heavy clunk. It was in that moment, with the bolt retracted, that my brain caught up to my actions. "Click off the safety," the words echoed. Eli didn't have a safety on his deadbolt. He hated the term. He called it a latch or a bolt. He'd mocked me once for using the word safety, saying it sounded like I was handling a firearm, not opening a door. It was a tiny thing, an insignificant semantic slip, a phrase it must have plucked from some other mind, some other memory. A single misplaced stitch in an otherwise perfect tapest. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The thing on the other side of the door must have sensed the shift. The friendly pretense vanished instantly. "Open the door," it said. Its voice was still Eli's, but the warmth was gone. It was flat, dead, and impossibly cold. I threw my weight against the door, slamming the deadbolt back into place with a shaking hand. A silence followed, more terrifying than any sound. Then, a single hard knock. Tap. Not with a fist. It was the sound of bone on wood. Open the door. ... The pounding started then. A slow, relentless, brute force assault that shook the entire house. The door jamb splintered. The frosted glass cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading from a central point. The dogs were a frenzy of noise and motion, hurling themselves at the door, their barks sharp and savage. I backed away, my mind racing, searching for anything, any weapon, any last line of defense. The thing outside changed its tactics again. The pounding stopped. "Please," it said. And now it was my mother's voice again, choked with sobs. "Please, honey, it's so cold. I'm so scared. Just let me in. I just want to see you." The emotional whiplash was nauseating, from violence to utter vulnerability in a second. I didn't answer. I focused on my breathing. In, out. I looked at the thin, gray line of ash at the base of the door. It remained undisturbed. It hadn't crossed it. It couldn't. It had to break its way through. Then, it began to hum, a tuneless, wandering melody that slowly resolved into a song. It was the lullaby my mother used to sing to me, the one I had never, ever told anyone about. Tears streamed down my face. It was the cruelest trick yet. It wasn't just mimicking a voice. It was mimicking a memory, a feeling of safety and love from a time before fear. It was offering me a counterfeit comfort, and a part of me desperately wanted to accept it. It cycled through voices again. Eli's, his father's, mine, pleading, threatening, reasoning. It was throwing everything it had at the door, both physically and psychologically. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and covered my ears. I closed my eyes. I retreated into the core of myself, into a small, dark place where its words couldn't reach. I thought of the dogs. I thought of the ash. I thought of the simple, unbreakable rules. Don't answer, don't give, don't take. I don't know how long it lasted. An hour? 3? But eventually, the voices faded. The humming stopped. The presence I had felt so acutely on the other side of the door simply vanished. The normal sounds of the night, the crickets, the wind, rushed back in. The dogs, panting and exhausted, ceased their barking and lay down, their bodies still tense, but no longer poised to attack. I didn't move until the sun was fully up, its light streaming through the cracked window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had held the line. The real Eli returned the next day. This time, when the truck pulled up, the dogs erupted into a cacophony of pure, unadulterated joy. They scratched at the door, whining and yelping, their entire bodies wriggling with excitement. I looked out the window, my nerves shot. I saw Eli get out, but I waited. I watched the dogs. They were ecstatic. This was real. I opened the door and the dogs burst past me, nearly knocking Eli over. He laughed, roughing up their fur, his face breaking into a wide, genuine grin. Then he looked at me. His smile faded. "My God," he said. "What happened to you?" I must have looked like a ghost, pale, shadow-eyed, trembling with residual adrenaline. I just shook my head. I didn't have the words. He saw the cracked window, the splintered door jamb. His eyes widened. Without a word, he stepped inside and pulled me into a rough, brief hug. "Let's get your stuff. We're leaving. Now." It took us less than 15 minutes to throw my things into my car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look toward the gate. I just got in my car and followed Eli's truck down that dusty access road for the last time. We didn't go straight to the city. We went to Allie's place first. Her small, neat house felt like a fortress of sanity. She was waiting on her porch, as if she'd known we were coming. She didn't say a word about what had happened. She just looked at me, gave a slow, knowing nod, and said, "Coffee's on, and there's stew." Sitting at her kitchen table, eating hot food, the nightmare began to feel like something that had happened in another lifetime. But the tremble in my hands as I lifted the spoon told a different story. As we got ready to leave, Eli turned to her. "You were right, Allie. I should have listened." "It's not about listening," she said, her gaze distant. "It's about surviving. You both did." She looked at me. "You held the line. That's all any of us can do." I never went back. Eli sold the ranch not long after. We never really spoke of it again. Some horrors are too vast for words. I live in town now, in a second-story apartment with good locks and neighbors on all sides. The noise is a constant comfort, but the trauma, it lingers. It's in the hypervigilance, the way I still sometimes check the peephole before I open my door, even at noon. It's in the dreams, and sometimes, very rarely, it's in the waking world. I'll be reading or washing dishes, and I'll hear it. A voice from the hallway, just outside my apartment door. Sometimes it's Eli's. "Hey, you home? Let me in. I forgot my key." Sometimes it's my mother's. "Honey, it's me. I was in the neighborhood." Once, and only once, it was my own. "You know you want to. Just open the door. See what's out here." The words are perfect. The cadence is flawless. It's learned. It's always learning. But I've learned too. I never answer. I never go to the door. I just stand still, my heart hammering, and I wait for it to go away. And it always does. Because I understand now, in a way that is carved into my soul, that there are things in the dark that feed on acknowledgement. That the worst thing you can do is offer them a piece of yourself by speaking their name, or by answering when they call yours. So this is my warning to you, the only one that matters. It's a simple rule, but it's the one that will save your life, your mind, your very soul. When something calls your name from the dark, from the other side of the door, from the edge of the woods, don't answer. Not even if it sounds like your mother. Not even if it sounds like your best friend. Not even if it sounds exactly like you. "This is from a juniper tree," she said. "Burned in a specific way, old medicine. It doesn't like it. It confuses its senses, makes the lines between inside and outside clear." She stood up and walked to the front door. With a practiced hand, she poured a thin, unbroken line of the ash across the entire threshold, from one side of the doorframe to the other. "Every entrance," she instructed, "every windowsill, every crack it could possibly get through. You make a line. Don't break it. Don't sweep it away. It's a fence it won't cross." I watched, mesmerized, as this simple, superstitious act felt more real and powerful than any lock or weapon. "There are rules," she continued, turning back to me, her eyes deadly serious. "You listen to them, you might make it through the week. First, and this is the most important, if it calls you by name, you do not answer. You do not even look in its direction. To answer is to give it a piece of yourself. It's an invitation.